Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our audio podcast, Voices Unveiled, a platform where we give space to women's stories from different corners of the world. I'm your host, Sumina. In this episode, we are joined by my colleague, Alejandra Duarte, whom we lovingly call Ale. She is a policy associate at Women for Biodiversity, and today we explore the intersection of biodiversity conservation and gender, focusing on the Gender Plan of Action, or GPA. If you are unaware of GPA, then you might have just hit the jackpot, because we will talk about everything that you need to know about integrating gender perspectives in biodiversity initiatives. Before we delve into this engaging conversation, please do not be shy to subscribe or follow Women for Biodiversity in our social media. Your support is much appreciated. Hi Ale, thank you so much for coming in today. Please give a brief introduction to our listeners about yourself.
Hi, Sumina. Thank you so much for having me on the Women for Biodiversity podcast. I'm Alejandra Duarte. I'm a Peruvian agroforestry engineer for as long as I can remember. I have been advocating for natural conservation. And this was later on translated to my studies decisions, and I am very happy to say that I'm finishing my master's degree in forestry resources conservation, and currently I am policy associate at Women for Biodiversity.
Welcome again, Ale. So to begin this podcast, what is the Gender Plan of Action, or GPA?
Yes, the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action, or GPA, was adopted at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties through the COP15 decision. The name of the decision is 1511. This happened on December 2022. And it's a document that marks an important milestone in pursuing gender equality and biodiversity conservation. The GPA provides a roadmap for implementing gender mainstreaming and gender-responsive approaches within Common Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and it also provides a clear framework that aims to support and promote the rights, needs, and interests of women and girls, who are crucial actors in biodiversity conservation, are considered in the implementation of the International Framework of Biodiversity.
We have sort of touched upon my next question in this answer of yours, Ali, where you have said that the GPA supports and promotes the rights and interests of women and girls. However, I would want to still ask, why is it important, especially for women and girls around the world?
Well, because women are the primary stewards of natural resources in many communities. They have knowledge and experiences in traditional ecological practices that are different from men. They also actively contribute to biodiversity conservation efforts, but often they face barriers to participation in decision-making processes, fundings, capacity buildings, and have their contributions undervalued. That's what is important in the GPA, because the GPA recognizes the importance of advancing efforts to achieve gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment to ensure the effective implementation of the Common Montreal framework, right? So they make sure that the full and effective participation and leadership of women in all aspects of the convention processes, particularly in policy and action at national and local levels, it's promoted. And that's one of the main reasons why it's important, and also because gender equality and women's empowerment are essential for the sustainable use of biodiversity. So understanding and exposing these gender differentiated biodiversity practices contributes to successful conservation and makes efforts more effective and efficient, because women and vulnerable groups are empowered to participate as equals.
Okay. Then what challenges do women and girls face in terms of biodiversity conservation, and how are they addressed in the GPA?
Well, yes, women face, as you said, several challenges in terms of biodiversity conservation. I'm going to highlight just some of them. For example, starting with the limited rights to ownership and control over land and access to natural resources and to water. Then we have these stereotypes and discrimination limit to access education, capacity building, trainings, and leadership opportunities. then we are underrepresented in decision making, and we also have limited access to funding, which is really important because with the funding can help us to make some local projects, and it also empowered our activities. So how are these challenges are going to be addressed in the GPA? So the GPA contains 3 expected outcomes, under which are grouped a series of indicative objectives and actions related with the aim of supporting the achievement of all goals and targets of the biodiversity framework. So as is established on the outcomes, the GPA aims to that women and girls have equal opportunity and capacity to contribute to the 3 objectives of the Convention. Also have the objective to develop national capacity to produce and use gender and biodiversity data, including relevant data disaggregation, as by sex, by age, and by ethnicity. No? So in that way, we can see which group of the population are contributing to what specifically in biodiversity conservation. That's something that till this day we not clearly know. The GPA also promotes the organization of capacity building and the development of workshops and guidelines to enhance the capacity of women and girls organizations, networks, and gender experts. It promotes the inclusion of women in all levels of the decision-making processes and the access to financial resources, training, and mentorship opportunities. And it also encourages the creation of enabling environments that support women leadership and foster their participation in biodiversity conservation and decision making. That's some of the actions that the GPA proposes.
I'd like to go back to the point where you talked about funding gender responsive programs or projects. Can you explain why is it important for women to have direct access to funding, and how does it impact their progress?
Right now, the woman doesn't have this direct access to funding, no. So when we have, for example, some project that we want to make on the local level, and we need these resources to make it happen. So how do they access to this? And also, they give them empowerment, the direct access. It opens up for a lot of opportunities, so they can give you access to training, to capacity building, to technical advice, and at this moment we don't have that. So that's why funding is important. It becomes more empowers this group of women, and they enforce their leadership. No? So that's something that we really have to make sure and advocate on the next decision-making processes.
So keeping that in mind, what specific strategies would you recommend for integrating a gender perspective in conservation?
Some of specific strategies, it really more like recognizing and valuing the unique roles, perspectives, and contribution of women and girls in biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. That's something that has been advancing through the years, but it's not like all complete by now. No, we have more recognition that the contribution of women, but for example, we don't have this data disaggregation. So it is important to know what kind of like specific contributions. That's why it's so important, a baseline, and also that all the national strategies they apply with data disaggregation. And we also have in the GPA, like talking about the document, 30 specific activities to integrate a gender perspective in the international and national level. For example, we have this baseline data and research of the relationships between conservation and sustainable use on all women and girls, like rights to ownership and control over land and access to natural resources. We also have methodologies to mainstream gender perspective in access and benefit sharing instruments. Also, the support capacity development in leadership, negotiation, and facilitation for women delegates. Engage and mechanism to engage all relevant stakeholders, in particularly women groups and gender institutions and gender experts. Also establish targeted funding programs or budget lines to support gender responsive implementation, and raise awareness to financial and technical support available for promoting gender responsive approaches. So this gender plan of action, it has like an objectives and desirable outcomes, but it also recommends these specific activities that the government can implement to address or to implement the Kuhlman-Montreal framework in a gender responsive way. So it also has like a mapping of actors, so who are going to implement these activities. So if we can reference on the gender plan of action to implement the Kuhlman-Montreal biodiversity framework, we can also find who it's recommended to implement these specific activities. We have these governments, ministries, also civil society. So it's a really full a roadmap document.
It is indeed assuring to have the GPA as a roadmap for various reasons that you've just talked about. But how can the effective participation of women in environmental decision making be ensured at the ground level?
First, we have to address gender biases, promote gender responsive governance, and it is really important to create enable environments, recognize and value their traditional ecological knowledge, and also support women leadership development, facilitate and collaboration and network. So how can the effective participation of women in environment decision making, so how this can be ensured? We have to still advocate for gender responsive policies and legislation, and to raise awareness and promote the gender equality in all the areas and sectors in all the government levels.
I'm glad that you mentioned the government level in your answer, because that was going to be my next question about the role of governments and international organizations in implementing the GPA.
Government and international organizations have a shared responsibility for the implementation of the GPA. First, the governments, they are the primary actors at the national level. They need to adopt and implement gender-responsive policies and legislations. Also, prioritize gender equality in biodiversity conservation budgets and strengthen data collection and analysis. They have to support and promote the development of gender-responsive capacity building programs, and also foster collaboration and networking among government agencies in all levels, like local governments too, and also with civil society organizations and the organizations that works on the territory and in the local level. So that's really important. And for the international organizations, on the other hand, they also play a crucial role because they provide technical assistance and capacity building. They facilitate knowledge sharing and exchange of the knowledge. And they also advocate for gender equality in international agreements and in initiatives. They have this obligation to support gender responsive monitoring and evaluation to promote public awareness and education. So if they work together, we can effectively support and implement the GPA in national level while implementing the framework, and in that way contribute in the conservation of biodiversity as a whole society.
So even though the GPA is a major step towards the right direction, we still have a lot of work to do. So what do you think are the main challenges in integrating a gender perspective into biodiversity policies?
The main challenges. It is really important. So there's really a lack of awareness and understanding of the importance of gender equality in biodiversity conservation. we also have, we don't have this gender disaggregated data, so that's really important. So that means it's, as I mentioned before, if we don't have this gender disaggregated data, we don't have we don't have map like our baseline, so or identify these contributions. No, so it's really to address this in policies, for example. Well, we have also the gender stereotypes, the biases, the several policies and legislations that are not gender responsive. And we also need a lot of capacity building on the government actors so they can act with a gender approach. No, so we have to make have to raise awareness and promote understanding, collect and analyze this gender disaggregated data, and address these gender stereotypes, and make it review these policies and legislations that are not gender responsive. So I think that if we address these challenges, we can make significant progress in integrating a gender perspective into biodiversity policies.
You've raised excellent points, Ale. We do need gender disaggregated data, and we also need gender responsive programs. However, for our listeners who are not very familiar with these terms, can you tell us what are the meanings of gender disaggregated data and gender responsive, and why are they important?
Yes. Well, the gender disaggregated data, starting for that. So if we want to, for the following and monitoring, if we want to know what are the indicators, how do we start, and how are we continuing to see if we achieve these targets, because, for example, some target is to restore the 30% of land, coastal, and marine territories. So how do we know that we achieve this 30%? Now we have to generate this data. We have to know this data. And if we say gender disaggregated data, is that all these all these indicators, all this data that we are generating, that we are collecting, it has to be with differentiated by gender. Now, for example, how many women owns these are owner of territories? Because there's a problem now with this challenge, that most of the work labor in agricultural chains are the 60% are women, but woman doesn't have the right to own these agricultural fields. So if we can, how do we know this? Because we have this gender disaggregated data. So as long as we know what are the contributions, we can identify the challenges, and we can address it. If we don't have this gender disaggregated data, it's really difficult to address it, because we don't have, like, in numbers, how many men are doing what and how many women are doing that, and once we know this, we can make programs, strategies, policies, projects to reduce this gap. So that's why it's important, this gender disaggregated data. And the other thing, the gender responsive. Gender responsive is an approach or policies or interventions that takes into account different needs, experiences, and circumstances of individuals based on the gender. It's different of gender sensitive, because gender sensitive is more like, okay, I'm aware of these different needs, but gender responsive, it's more like, okay, I'm aware, but I'm going to make some actions to reduce this gap,
Thanks for explaining those terms, Ale. So, coming back to our original conversation, so how can governments and international organizations effectively implement policies with gender responsive approach?
We have different levels of policy. Now we have this international sphere, then we have to go down into a national sphere, and then to a local sphere. So how can we implement these policies with a gender responsive approach? No. Okay, so in the international sphere, okay, we have the gender plan of action, the international the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has these targets that promotes gender equality, that promotes woman participation in the decision-making processes. But how we can make it like effective, no, in the national level. So in national level, we have the national reports and action plans that's called the NBSAPs. That are the strategies of how the parties, the countries are going to implement the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework on their national level, on their territory, on their countries. So so how can we implement this? So we have to first mainstream the gender in the NBSAPs. We can do it with the GPA as a tool, because the NBSAP are really crucial to implement the CBD at the national levels, and the progress reports on these plans should include these gender considerations. No, and also, the GPA include the gender considerations, so we can guide on the GPA, but also the government when they they have to actualize. I'm not sure if that's a word, but now they have to actualize the NPSAP, so they have to make it with the gender perspective. They can guide on the GPA, so that solves. But also the local governments, the NGOs, the project leaders that are working on the territory, they can also support the effective implementation of policies with a gender responsive approach. Because I also mentioned, the GPA is this roadmap that has different activities, and some of them can be implemented by civil society. So we can use these documents as reference. It is on the website of the CBD. We can access to the GPA. It comes in different languages. We have in Spanish and in Russian, in English, in Chinese. So we can access to this document. It is not a private document. It's we only have to search it on Google. We can Google for this document, and we can use it as reference, to ensure that these policies, to ensure that at the local level we can contribute in the implementation of the policies with a gender responsive. We don't have just to implement a gender responsive approach on the up to down vision, but we also can make it with the down up vision, in these levels that we have. So we need to, us like a civil society, know that we can also use these documents as reference.
Yes, definitely, and glad that you mentioned where we can find these documents. So now we are heading towards the end of the podcast. So, and I want to ask you, despite all the challenges that we talked about, what is a major change that you'd like to witness in your lifetime?
Oh, that's kind of a difficult question, because I think that as a woman working biodiversity conservation, we want to see all the changes happen in our lifetime. We still don't have too much time now, but the first thing I would like to see in my lifetime is that we managed to hold biodiversity laws, all of us as a society. But that includes the rights of all people, all children, youth, women, indigenous women in all the diversities, indigenous people, local communities. All their rights are equally respected and valued. I think that we need to be more aware of the differences and inequalities that exist in our society. I think it's not possible that there are still people who believe that implementing a gender responsive actions or or intersectional approach are not necessary, like in the policies, in projects, or they don't address it. They think that it's just to mention, like, okay, we have differentiations between genders, but they don't make like actions to reduce this gap. No? So I would like really see, I would really like to witness this change.
Beautiful, beautiful thoughts, Ali. And I hope we do get to see those change in our lifetime as well. So, one last question before I let you go. What would you say to young individuals who are working every day in biodiversity conservation?
I would say that their work is really, really very important for the future of our planet. No, often it can be frustrating and seems like we are stuck in the same place, but everything that the youth do, that we do, is a step towards sustainability and the future that we want. So don't give up, still seek for opportunities, find people who share your passion, and join the group with these people, because it's always better when you find people with the same targets and ideals that you have. It's like a support of still working towards biodiversity conservation, towards gender equality, and the sustainability that we all want.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the podcast. If you want to know more about GPA or the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, then please visit www.cbd.int. If you have any questions or comments, then please drop them below or send it to us at communications@womenforbiodiversity.org. That is number 4 instead of FOR. So until the next episode, stay strong and carry on.